Good day. Welcome to this month's Intentional Success webinar. Today we're going to talk about how to pivot in an unpredictable industry. This is all about making that transformation that you're going through right now, whether you think it's temporary or permanent. How do we convert that into results? Let's talk about how we do that today, and let's revisit some of the things that we've been learning over the past few months. I am, for you, those of you who are new to us, I am your host, Tom Stimson. I'm the founder of the Stimson Group, the Intentional Success newsletter, intentionalsuccess.biz, Jumpstart Workshops, AV Matters newsletter, avmatters.com. Seems to me I might want to consolidate a few of those things, but we've got a lot of fronts out there where we're trying to talk to folks to help them. So thank you for being a part of this, and please share it with your friends. I want to start off by talking about opportunity and uncertainty. I'm one of those people who is known for doing well in a crisis. I think I probably do better in a crisis than I do in normal social situations. And part of what attracts me or focuses me in a crisis situation is the options. There are so many options that we could take. And by understanding what those options are, working through the permutations of each path you might take and what that result might yield for you helps guide us in our next moment and our next decision. And so in uncertainty, I find that there's a lot of opportunity because very often we see paths that we wouldn't have seen before. So the truth is, I really do like change. I think change is awesome. I like it because when the rules are rewritten, we find better rules. I don't think we have to go backwards in uncertainty. I think the opportunity is always to go forward. And as I've been talking with folks extensively over the past couple of weeks, as we've been getting the Intentional Success community started, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, is how powerless many of us felt in reliving what we went through back in January, February, March, April, as the industry shutdown kind of unfolded in front of us, and how powerless we felt. So I'm going to ask you now here, it's August, we're 6 months into this. Tell me what makes you feel powerless now. What are the things that are making you feel like you don't have control over your situation? And write those things down for yourself and remind yourself about those things, or share them in the chat if you'd like to do that. What's making you feel powerless right now? Because that's what we need to do something about. That's what crisis is all about. Where can we take back some control so that we can make a decision about where we are going to go going forward? So here are some of the things that people have been talking to me about, and I hear these fairly repeatedly, and there's probably all on your list, is we worry about when we can return to safe in-person events, because so much of our business and industry relies on getting large groups of people together. Will those employees I had to furlough or lay off, will they come back when I have work for them again? Or are they going to be there when I need them? Can I extend my cash flow until I've got regular income once again? How long can I go on this? And then what could happen in the interim? We have this process that we've been going through. We survive first, we stabilize, and then we look to the future to figure out how we can thrive again. And in your stabilization mode, where many of you are right now, there's this constant uncertainty in front of you of what else is going to happen, what else is going to undermine our plans or kick our feet out from underneath us. But you have control over a lot of things. And that's what I want to talk about today. There's so much you have control over. And if you'll stop and disassociate yourself from, your concerns and your worries, and pull back and look at your situation, we have control over some fantastic things that will help us in our business. Something that's become very apparent to us in the past 6 months is that you have control over your target customer. And we found this out when we started selling to our old target customer, only to find out that they had no business, had no control over future business, and really couldn't do anything for us. They were happy to talk to us because, well, we were all sitting at home not doing anything in quarantine, but they weren't really your customer anymore. So understanding that you have control over who your target customer is allows you to make that shift. You can change your products and services. Many of us have had to. Okay? Our old products and services, if we're putting gear in a ballroom, There's not a lot of demand for that right now, but what can we do with our knowledge in the interim? Or what can we do with our knowledge instead? You have control over overhead expenses. You're still fighting it. I know you're still trying to get your overhead expenses down. You're still making difficult choices about what you're going to carry on going forward. But that's part of what being a business owner is all about. That's part of what being a family member is all about. In your family expenses and your personal expenses, how can I control those expenses that are optional or choices that I can make so that my money will last longer? And then you also have control over your minimal acceptable margin. You know, right now there's a lot of folks there that are working for cost. If I can cover my payroll, put a few people to work, I'm happy to take a job. That's your minimal acceptable margin. You don't have control over anybody else's, but you do have control over yours. And if you have control over your products and services and your customer and your overhead expenses, all of those things can work together to help you redefine your business model, which you absolutely have control over. And then ultimately, you have control over all of your decisions. Okay? You may not like your choices. I often don't. Okay, but you have control over the decisions you make based on the choices that you have. So the question is really, how do you regain control of these variables? How do you get to the point where you feel like these variables are working for you instead of against you? And this is what we've been going through, right? We're going through this transformation in our industry. Now, I know many of you believe that we're taking an interim step. You know, interim is a dangerous word right now because we don't know how long we will need to be in this stabilized state of doing streaming meetings and hoping that we have in-person or hybrid events soon. We're going through a transformation. So let's acknowledge what those components of the transformation actually are. We started off by surviving. You know, early on in the pandemic and the crisis and the shutdown and the quarantine, you instinctually responded to the threats that were out there. Okay? You needed to self-preserve, whether it was reducing hours, cutting expenses, you know, calling in loans, whatever it might be. You did what you had to do so that you had the comfort to get to the next stage, which is stabilize. How do we stabilize our situation? When I am comfortable that my short-term needs are being met, then I can focus on a longer term need, and that's what stabilize is all about. It's a temporary state of balance. We know it's not going to last forever, right? Your goal is to get to this interim solution that's going to carry you forward until the point where you can thrive again. But there's another step in between stabilize and thrive. It's called pivot. Well, we're all tired of hearing about pivot. I get that. It's got an asterisk by it because pivot is optional. Pivot is the process for replacing aspects of your business. You're creating a new strategy or you're creating a new business model so that you can take advantage of the situation. Pivot may get you to a new point of stabilization, or pivot may be your future. And that's completely up to you. But ultimately, we want to get back to the point where we can thrive because we're intentionally going to grow and profit in our business. The goal for any of us, whether you're an independent contractor or a business owner with hundreds of employees, is to retire with means. I think that's probably the universal construct that we all have, is that we want to be able to retire securely, know that we can take care of ourselves and our family, look after our health, look after our loved ones. That's what we're all probably working for. So how do we get there? So whether or not you need to pivot is determined by how well you stabilize and then how soon that stabilization will let you thrive again. Let me give you an example. Say, for instance, you came into the pandemic very quickly. Your first client cancellations immediately wanted to move towards a hybrid event so that they weren't going to lose all of their deposits on hotels and convention centers and things like that. And so you found that spot where you could fit in some streaming event, some hybrid event. You adjusted your business model and you accommodated them. So you quickly stabilized. Right? That's a type of a pivot. Now, how well you can thrive in that situation depends on how long that situation is going to work. And as we quickly saw, hybrid events weren't going to happen. Matter of fact, we had a cascade of cancellations that led us to the potential of streaming events, but our clients weren't ready to stream because they were too busy digging out of the cancellation of their in-person events and all the legal and logistical ramifications of that. So stabilizing at hybrid was not going to lead to a thrive in the very near future. So how well you're able to thrive in the future depends on how good of a choice you've made or how lucky you've been and how you've chosen to stabilize. So survival 101. How did we survive? We reduced expenses, we collect our receivables, we negotiated our payables, we asked for forbearance on loans and leases and rents, and we built and monitored a cash flow forecast, which I hope you're still following religiously and updating constantly, because that's our measuring stick right now. How long can I continue to survive in my business with the limited incomes and the overhead that I can no longer reduce, that I've got it to a finite point? Then we moved into stabilize. In stabilization, you're going to either broaden or you're going to narrow your focus. Okay, so you can broaden or narrow your target customer, product, or service, or you can add or delete lines of business depending on what makes sense for you. Now, many of us, our first reaction was to broaden our business because we want any kind of business that we can get. But some of you have quickly realized that what you need to do is narrow your business, get very, very focused about what you're trying to do. There's no wrong answer here. The point is, it's part of the process of stabilization to retarget that customer, figure out who it is that you want to go after, what can you do for them, what do they need, and what are the product and services you're going to bring to them. The second part of stabilize is redoubling efforts. It's the doubling down when you're playing poker. It's saying, you know what, we're on the right path. I'm going to commit to this. You have to be very strong and brave in stabilization to be willing to redouble your efforts. But sometimes you have to do the things that you know will work. Picking up the phone and calling a customer, communicating to your employees, okay? Getting the marketing message out there. We know these things will work, but they don't seem like the thing that we want to do right now. And that's what redoubling is all about. Committing to the things that you know will make a difference, even though they're not the things that are going to satisfy your immediate need, which is probably cash flow and comfort. And then stabilize, another type of stabilize is minimizing. Now, I do work with companies that have minimized. That's the strategic waiting. Let's shut everything down. Let's close in. Let's wait. Any one of these methodologies will work. You know, when you minimize, you do the strategic waiting, you get rid of your overhead, you pack everything into one inexpensive warehouse and you wait until recovery, whenever that is. Whenever there's another decision point that lets you to reopen your business or relaunch your business. So change your focus, redouble your efforts, strategic waiting, or a combination of the three. So most of your stabilization processes have focused on a product line or service. We're going to do streaming events. Let's build a studio. You know, here's our switching hub. That's a tactical response to a strategic problem. And that is part of changing your focus. So that's moving your focus, right? So 3 different types of stabilize and then some combinations in between. But do you need to pivot? I mean, really, is it necessary for you, for your business model? And I don't know the answer. Everybody's situation is a little bit different. But here are the things that I'm looking at when people ask me, Tom, should I pivot? Here are what I think my options are. Should I take them? Well, let's examine how far stabilization has gotten you. If your stabilization plan and your cash flow will carry you well into maybe next spring, end of first quarter of next year, when we hopefully might start seeing some new events happen, then yeah, maybe you don't need to pivot right now. Maybe your stabilization is going to carry you through. However, if the long-term viability of the strategy that you're in, the products and services in your target customer, is at risk, and the longer the dearth of meetings goes on, the worse that you're going to be, then maybe pivot now becomes an important option for you to consider. In other words, if you can't outlast the situation in your stabilization mode, then pivot is your next choice. And for some of us, it's about risk. How much uncertainty can you bear? How long do you want to be uncertain? So if you need to move from extreme uncertainty to something more secure, then a pivot might be in your future. Make sense? But there's some reasons that you might not want to pivot. I mean, pivots, it's a big decision. One, it's permanent. It's very hard to roll back a pivot. And I know many of you are concerned about that. If I pivot to streaming events, how do I go back to in-person events? I had to let my team go. I had to change my products and services. I had to downsize. It's going to be difficult to go back to what we were doing before. Yeah, a lot of what we're doing right now could very well be permanent. The other thing about pivot is that it's a strategic decision. It affects everything if you look at it correctly. It affects how you market. It affects how you finance. It affects how you forecast. Your pricing, how you value things. Your entire business model can change in a pivot. The only thing that doesn't really change is the industry that you're in. We're in the live events industry. That part doesn't have to change. We're in the communications industry. That part doesn't have to change. But your business approach to it might. And the third thing about pivot is it's hard. And we're exhausted. We've been at this for months. I've seen so many people working so hard, losing sleep for month after month after month. And it's time to make some decisions so that we can start to make it easier again. Doesn't mean that we'll be as secure as we once were, but I think we're starting to see that there's a long-term chance that we're not going to get back to the business that we want to do in the next year. So what are we going to do differently? So there's a lot of reasons not to pivot, and I don't begrudge anybody who makes that choice. So if you're going to consider pivoting, let's talk about the types of pivot, right? There's the do-over. I talked about the do-over way back in the Show Will Go On webinar series. You know, you have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to go back and restart your business and fix everything, you know, fix all the choices that you made along the way. How are you structured? How do you do things? How do you price things? What are the processes? You can relaunch your original business model and just make different choices. For many of us, this was talking about the agency model of business, moving from having all of your services or most of your services in-house, full-time staff, you know, not offering anything that you couldn't source internally, into a model where you're sourcing most things externally. And it's a different way of presenting yourself. But that's a relaunch. That's a do-over. Another type of pivot is changing a strategic focus. For instance, one of the live events industries that's going to be long-term affected by the pandemic is the expo industry. It's going to be difficult for us to put a lot of people into a convention center, down aisles, into booths without addressing the density issues. So maybe you move out of that exhibits environment and you move into online experiences. That's a change in strategic focus. It's probably a change in customers, but you're still in the same industry. Another type of pivot is changing the way that you make money. Now, I've talked about this a lot. Actually, I've been talking about this for years and years and years with production rental companies. If you're an asset-based rental company and you're used to 70% of your bill being for rental equipment and 30% being for services, you now need to flip that formula in a pivot. So that's one way to change your money, change your business, is make money differently. Put the emphasis on something else. Okay? And then the fourth kind of pivot is the change your stakeholders. Do you divest your company? Do you merge with another organization? Do you acquire someone who has skills and services that will help you out? Changing the stakeholders in your business, redistributing the balance sheet, settling or reacquiring debt in such a way to give you a longer life and a longer runway is certainly a type of pivot. So all of these things are available to you. Once you've stabilized, you got a little breathing room and you want to take a look at it. Now, I want to talk here about the difference between, strategy and business model. Okay? your strategy, here's an example strategy, helping meeting planners become effective agents of streaming events. That is a business strategy. There's a number of ways that you can go about doing this. There's lots of business models that can help someone with this business strategy. In other words, I can have 10 different people on this webinar who all have the exact same strategy word for word and choose completely different business models to serve it. So a public relations model will help a meeting planner present themselves better as a resource for streaming events. A marketing firm will help change the perception, not change the perception, change the presentation of that company to the marketplace. A sales agency, we're going to get boots on the ground and we're going to sell for this company so that they don't have to be the expert. We're going to put an expert in front of them. Education and training, software as a service. There's a lot of business models that will meet the strategic needs of serving this strategic customer, this strategic focus, right? So don't let the two of those things keep you from thinking about the other, right? You can have a business strategy which is focused on a live event segment that's important to you, providing something that you think is valuable without tying you down to a specific business model, which right now is probably the business model you've had for years, which I understand is extremely difficult to let go of. And then this is about a mix. I just laid out a whole bunch of moving parts for you. And none of them are definitive. You don't have to choose one and push it to 11. You can choose bits and pieces of everything and make the transformation the way that you want to make it. You can make your pivot as subtle or as extreme as you want it to be, or you could make your stabilization model as static or as flexible as you want it to be. Okay? You have control over these things. You get to decide who your customer is, what your margins are, how do you want to go to market. All of those things are still in your control. What's not in your control is necessarily doing business the way that you used to, because if there's no demand, there's no business, right? So I'm interested in your questions. Please feel free to post them in the Q&A box so I can get to them. Let's stop and pause for a moment and talk about intentional success and what it is that I do for organizations. Look, intentional success is helping you outsell yourself, right? We want frictionless sales and we want to maximize gross profit. Doing the things that allow that to happen is what intentional success is all about. Think about this. This is sales, operations, and finance, right? How do we make those three levers of our business work in our favor so that we're attractive, that we are steerable, nimble, and we're profitable? Because if we remove any one of these things, if we don't control these things, then we are going to be reactive. And reactive companies don't have choices. They don't get to the stabilization mode that allows them to make an effective pivot or last as long as they need to until they can thrive again. So how can I help you? Give me a call, right? Free introductory call. I'm happy to tell you what I do for folks, how I help you with coaching, group coaching, strategic assessment, whatever it might be. You have questions. You need to affirm your goals, validate the challenges that you're facing, ask the big questions about your business. Anybody who's done this with me knows I'm very generous with my time. I'd like to help you understand more about what your options are and help you move forward. And if I can help you in them, that's great. So here it is. You got 25 minutes waiting for you. You got nothing to lose. Just book the call. Let's chat about your business. If you'll ask your questions and give me a few minutes to talk about what it is I do, then everybody wins. And I'd love the opportunity to help you out. Which brings me to talking about the Intentional Success Network. This is a community of your peers, and this is something that we have created, I and my team have created for you, for this audience of folks who've been following me so faithfully for many, many, many years. This is a frictionless way of helping yourself at your pace when you want it to. I've created a free community, and if you're on this webinar, then your people are probably already here. The folks that you want to interact with, that you want to ask questions of, that you need to network with, whose skills and talents you need to leverage for your business and yours, they're on this community already and it is growing. So adding you to our community will make it all that much better. So I'm hoping that you'll take a look at it. But here's a quick peek for those of you who haven't seen it. First of all, it is free to join and participate. There's no fee based on this. We have complimentary courses on there. You have access to me to ask questions. We have topics on just about everything you can imagine. I have newsletter archives, webinar archives, and we're creating new content every single week. The navigation is easy. It's a really pretty cool platform. It's visually interesting, and you can find what you're looking for in a number of different ways, which I think you'll enjoy. And sharing by topics. We've got a lot of topics on here. And I invite you to take a look at Community Roadmap. I've got tours of the site. I talk about the future of where we're going with all this and what it will mean for you. This is a long game. We're going to be here for you for a long time to come, and we're just getting started. So welcome getting in on the ground floor. As I am fond of saying these days, we are smarter together, and getting together on intentional success is going to help us continue to amplify all of our smartness. And one more thing, tomorrow and every Thursday, I have office hours events. The time varies, so you need to join. See when this week's or next week's time is, RSVP and join us. We've got quite an international audience, so I'm varying the times so that we can get everybody on from one week to the next. So I host events each week, and we have more stuff in the works. So come on down, look forward to seeing you there. So I'm going to pause here for some questions. Our summary about all of this, just to get you back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago. You have to survive in order to stabilize. You can't stabilize until you've taken care of the immediate needs, and you can't thrive until you've stabilized. So we've got to do these things in order. And you can wait for better times once you have stabilized. That's certainly your option, but you also have the option to pivot if you want to get faster results and take a path that maybe somebody else hasn't taken, or where the market seems to be taking all of us. And if you choose to pivot, there are 4 paths of pivoting that you can consider. So you've got a lot of options. So thank you for listening to me once again this month. I really enjoy talking to all you folks. I will look at the chat here, but I see some familiar faces, and thank you guys for being here. Let me see what we have in terms of questions, and I'll be happy to answer a few questions, and then I'll let you get back to your day. Stand by. All right. And your question, you're welcome to ask a question about anything. You guys know me well enough. Post anything you want to ask about. I'm happy to go there, but please use the Q&A box for me today. Joe asks, we are seeing more platforms offering creative and production services as part of their offerings. We have upped our proposal quality to continue to be of value to our clients. Are others seeing this? Yes, Joe, I can tell you, this is pretty much permeating our industry. This is the most popular pivot path, is to add creative and production services, because content is king in the streaming world. And what we've learned in streaming events is, unlike our old live events where we loaded a truck and went into a ballroom, a little bit of pre-production and some drawings, 70% of the work was in the ballroom, 30% of it was pre-production. Maybe it was 20-80. Now in the streaming world, 80% of our work is pre-production, and the event is the smaller piece of the pie. So yes, creative and production fills up that 70 to 80% of pre-production. So in order to capture that and be the lead contractor on a job, to control the job and have the right to hire subcontractors and bring in outsourced people so that you can capture that gross profit, means that you have to offer creative and production in order to be viable in that space. So yes, am I seeing lighting companies doing video editing? Absolutely. But the good thing is there's a huge gig economy out there that is ready and waiting to work for you. And folks are bringing together partners that are allowing them to do that. So great question, by the way. And Mike mentions in the chat that if you don't pivot, it's still important to stay engaged with your clients, or else you will lose their business in the long term. And this is absolutely true. For my clients, and I have a couple folks I'm working with who are in the shutdown mode, they're basically doing the strategic waiting game. We're communicating, we're helping them communicate with their clients so that their clients know what to expect and when to expect it and what to do in the interim. Now, I do recommend for these companies to have a strategic partner, because if their clients do have an event and you have a company that's basically hibernating, they've got to come back to life very quickly, but they don't have the staff or the resources. Have some good partners in place that you can capture that customer and they'll be there for you in the long run. So Mike, thank you for that comment. Craig asks if some companies don't pivot in some small way, at the very least today, isn't that setting themselves up for failure as we enter the new normal? I hate the term. We all hate new normal. Without doing something new, how will they succeed? And that's the question. And that is the strategic question. If you don't do something new right now, how will you succeed? It is possible to engineer stabilization, a sustainable stabilization without a pivot. It's not something I'm going to recommend wholeheartedly to many folks, but for some people, it's exactly the right thing to do. And I'll give you an example, and this is the extreme example. There are business owners who are older than me, if you can imagine, and many of them have reached out to me and say that they're done. They can't do this anymore. A gentleman reached out to me just this past week, told me his history. I'd heard of his company. I'd heard of him. Very old company in our industry, and he was hanging it up. And it's like, I get it. I get it. Why, you're at your age, why start over? You don't have something that you can sell. There's not really something to merge here. The company wasn't really that up to date. So he's going to have to cut his losses, take what he has, liquidate and get out. Okay. That's an extreme pivot, but it is one of the pivot options. But if you want to stay in the business, doing something proactive, getting to the next plateau of stabilization is probably a better choice. And it is. Pivoting's hard work. Getting to that next plateau is hard work because you're not done. And until we know what the next normal is going to be, we're not going to be done stabilizing. We're going to continue to adjust and stabilize at different levels and different fronts as we get through this. So thank you for that. So if we don't have any more questions, I just want to close out here by saying thank you again for being with us. Every month, Intentional Success webinars, I'm going to take on a big topic like this, a big challenge like this, and help you understand how to frame that strategically for your business. I'm going to invite you to reach out to me if I can help you do that. I'm going to encourage you to join the Intentional Success Network because we have a community of people that are going through the same thing that you're going through. And let's do it together because we're smarter together and we're all in this together. And I say that with all sincerity. These are not just tropes out there in the marketing world. This is who we are. And I encourage you to stay with us. So thank you for being here. Thank you for pulling for our industry and for each other. And I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for being here.